We do have a lot to talk about today, as Todd talked about, and the focus of this is really delivering solutions. I think we are all here because we know of the issues that are facing the energy industry writ large, and so today we really want to hear on ways that we have sort of gotten to yes, and also, though, to remind us of what some of the obstacles are, and we want to hear from those that really have on-the-ground experience about what changes might need to be made in the policy area, and whether it's at FERC or Congress, the White House. So we hope that this morning we're going to touch on all of that. We have enough time. We also have the opportunity that, as you have experienced in the earlier panels, that if you have a question that we haven't thought of or we're not covering, please text it through the device that you have, and we'll reserve hopefully enough time to hear from your questions too, because we want this to really be meaningful and a productive expenditure of time. So now with that, you've heard our panels. I'd like to begin by just helping set the stage here of you all have been here because you have figured out solutions, but I want to ask you, what's new, right? So, and right away I see, well, what's new, certainly to most of us in this room, is really Aaron's group. Aaron, so if I can start with you were new sort of to us, right? The Data Centers Coalition. In part, because of your group, we have this increased energy demand. We now suddenly have this big need to have even new solutions from the days when a lot of us have been here. So I'm going to turn it to you. And so what's new? And I know you've worked with Excel, so you have some of the other experience too, but we'd like to hear from you.
Yes, so I am the new guy in town. Good morning, everyone. Aaron Tingham, I am the Vice President of Energy for the Data Center Coalition. If you are not aware, DCC is the National Membership Association for the U.S. data center industry. We currently represent 36 different data center owners and operators with infrastructure investments and teams across the country. We also represent companies leasing large amounts of data center capacity, 50 megawatts of data center capacity or more, that are also impacted by issues related to data center development. The reason we are new and the reason we are growing is really a reflection of all of us and our use of the internet, our use of the cloud, and our use of data center services. If you take a step back, and I know in many of these energy circles, we love to dive straight into the deeper, nuanced energy conversations, which we'll certainly get to today. But our members are seeing unprecedented demand for data and digital services. If you consider, on average, Deloitte finds that U.S. households now have 21 connected devices to the internet. So if you think about how your own internet use has changed over the years, my household, we have multiple computers, multiple smartphones, multiple streaming devices, smart thermostats, smart smoke detector, video doorbell, a smart sprinkler system. All of these devices are generating and consuming more data than ever before, and we have more of them than ever before. You go beyond the household and you consider how businesses are using the cloud, using internet to date. We know 95% of Fortune 500 companies, their products and services are now heavily dependent on cloud-based infrastructure. Beyond that, even within the energy industry as a whole, we hear about demand response programs leveraging smart thermostats. That requires the digital infrastructure provided by data centers. We hear about managed electric vehicle charging and how that will help manage future electrification load. That will also require digital infrastructure provided by data centers. We hear about grid enhancing technologies, those that will help us wring out all of the capacity in our transmission infrastructure. All of that also requires data center infrastructure. And so it's interwoven into our daily lives, it's interwoven in our modern economy, and it's interwoven in our grid. And all of this infrastructure requires energy, and so that's really brought us here today. It's why I'm honored to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, welcome to the group. And thank you for increasing the demand. I think all of us are very much excited of the challenges to bring more energy into the grid. And again, thank you really for the impact it's had on our lives. I mean, we all experienced this. So thank you and welcome to this. Let me turn to Jim. Jim, you know, what's new in your world? I mean, you have seen the movement on restructuring. I mean, you're in the competitive markets. Talk to us a little bit about, from your point of view, you know, what's new?
Well, first, I want to welcome Aaron. No, we are engaging with all customer classes. In some ways, I would say what's old is new again. So we're talking nuclear. We hadn't talked nuclear as a country really in quite some time. We're talking about gas-fired generation again. Yesterday, I was at a conference in Houston for power and gas, and it was investors and industry participants, and they asked me the question, why is gas coming back? Now, this is a room full of oil and gas folks, so they just want to know from a power company's perspective. I think 10 years ago, there was a view that flat load growth was sort of the scenario that we should plan for. Decarbonization is also a priority for many customers and electric grids. And so we all embarked, and we are in all forms of the technology. So we have 40,000 megawatts, and it's gas first, then nuclear, then coal, solar, battery. We are not a wind owner-operator, but we are a big wind off-taker. But I think the solution set of wind, solar, and battery is not set up at the moment to meet 24/7 loads that Aaron's customers have. It's also not set up to meet the retirement of coal and the growth on the electric grid. So gas has proven itself as a more near-term, viable, dispatchable, reliable solution, as folks are also gearing up to think about what could we do with next generation of nuclear. I think that is a very different conversation than the conversation that was happening 10 years ago. And I think that there's more than enough capacity within this industry, whether it's competitive or regulated, to meet that challenge. But I think we have to have an honest conversation about if you're going to prioritize reliability, which our message as a company has always been reliability, affordability, and sustainability in that order. But if we're going to prioritize that, I think we have to have good conversation and an honest conversation about which resources provide that, because we've got to put the customer first.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sherman, you're in the competitive markets. You two have a broad fleet of different generation sources. What's new from your point of view?
So,
Well, I'm sorry. I was Sherman. I'm sorry.
I never want to speak before a commission. Generally a bad thing. No, I think I will iterate some of the points that Aaron and Jim made. First of all, I have 2 teenage daughters, so 21 connected. There's no way it's 21. Like, we were way over that average. But seriously, I think one of the biggest things that's new is, Aaron and Jim hit on this, is the load growth. I mean, simply the load growth. We've gone 15 years in the country with pretty much flat load growth until about 2021, 2022. We've seen it start to increase at that point in time, and it's just accelerated rapidly. We'd kept the lights on with reliability through replacing old. It's really hard to keep older stuff on that. It's not a strategy for meeting new load growth. You have to build new. So I think one of the key themes that we constantly think about is just speed to market. How can we get more infrastructure on quicker? Because I think that's going to be absolutely critical. And where are the pinch points in terms of developing new generation? I should step back. I'm with a CEO of Competitive Power Ventures. We are a developer, constructor, operator of about 6 gigawatts. We operate about 6 gigawatts of power, almost entirely in the competitive markets to meet commercial and industrial customers. The technology that we've developed and constructed has been natural gas-fired, wind, and solar. I think a prime example is in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have a large 1 gigawatt natural gas plant that came online in 2019. We just put online, the largest contiguous solar plant in the Commonwealth in 2023, and we're in the construction of a wind plant. I don't think, the discussion about, which technology is, a 1990s discussion. I think it's all of the technologies that are going to come on. We're not involved in nuclear. That's just because we don't have the capabilities, and I'm definitely not as smart as Jim. But I think nuclear is a huge part of the story. So load growth is new, and I think what is going to be new, and I think we're still working through it, is how do we get more on quicker? Because it's just been, we haven't had to do that in this country for a long time.
Yeah. Thank you, Sherman. You've really tied, the speed to market, I think, that Aaron was talking about. Mr. Chairman, I think I can call you that, right? Your term ended yesterday. I mean, this is not an April Fool's joke, right? But, Mr. Chairman, and you've really got a rich background. I mean, as a policymaker in the Senate, and now as a regulator. I mean, you have seen it. You've had to make hard decisions, if you will, on policies. But talk to us about what do you see too as new. I know Sherman has described some success stories, but let's hear it from your point of view.
Sure. So I think what certainly is new is the load, is the type of load and the size of this load. I also have 2 teenage daughters, and if you want to know how many items you have connected, replace a router someday, because I just did that about a month ago, and I'm still adding things to it that I didn't realize we had connected, from a dehumidifier on. So, we certainly have a lot of things connected, and that is certainly what's new. On our way down with my staff, we pulled the OPSI agenda from the April 2024 meeting. The word data center never appeared on it. We are OPSI meeting next week. I don't think you can find a day that the word data center is not on an agenda item. So that's certainly what's new. But I'll tell you what's not new, and that is customer expectations. When someone comes home from work and they flip the light on, they don't care how much power data centers need. They want the lights to come on. So that's the challenge we have, is making sure that happens while accepting all this new load opportunity.
And I would imagine they also look at affordability as
Certainly
well,
look
right?
at
I'm
affordability
sure,
as
and we
well,
can
yes.
get into that a little bit later. So I want to jump off a little bit about what Sherman had mentioned about some of the pinch points. I'd like to have this as an opportunity, really, from each of your points of view. We have a room full of either policymakers, Hill staff, those in the business that deal every day in talking to policymakers, whether it's at FERC, or on the Hill in the agencies. And so I'm just curious, what do you think, at a high level, but what do you think is needed now, Jim, if I can look at you, from the policymakers that can help address some of these issues that we talked about?
It's interesting that the first panel with Commissioner Pridemore, she talked about consistency. And I think we have not demonstrated a consistency in the competitive market with some of the market design principles. So, as a public company, when we think about taking care of the resources we steward, we will go through our board of directors. We will seek approval for projects that have, 3 to 5 years in some cases to come to fruition, and then have a 30 to 40-year life on top of that. It is really hard to be talking about what scenario under which you're actually presenting sometimes the projects to the board. And so I think whether you're a private or a public company, you're looking for the opportunity to earn a return, not a guarantee that you're going to have a return. I think that is what competitive markets have done so well, is shareholders are willing to take risks. We took a risk, by the way, in 2008 to bring a coal plant online in Texas. It was done in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, when there were higher natural gas prices. We brought the plant online. It came online in 2011. And by 2018, we retired that plant because natural gas prices due to fracking had come down so dramatically. We wrote off over $1.25 billion as a company. We did not seek any recovery of that. That should be on us. We made a bad decision. The customer didn't pay for that. And that's something I think competitive markets are not given enough credit for, is that risk profile that companies take should be encouraged. Like, we should actually be looking for the frameworks that say make that investment. We made the investment, it didn't work. What did we do? We went out and bought a bunch of natural gas-fired generation assets, and we acquired Dynegy. Okay, we adapted, and our business model has adapted from predominantly coal to predominantly gas and then nuclear. So I say, while we can talk about permitting reform, we can talk about what it takes to get the interconnect queue straightened out, but the framework of what economic opportunity exists, what price signals are actually going to be consistently sent if there's too little supply or even too much supply. We need the consistency of a market model, Mark, to be able to then consistently plan $1 billion a year plus of CapEx going into new assets.
Well, and Jim, allow me to follow up on that, because you've hit on a key point. Obviously, the market rules in ERCOT are different from, the market rules in PJM that has a capacity market. ERCOT doesn't. When you talk about efficient price signals in these markets, can you elaborate just a bit? Do you prefer Texas model? I mean, I'm sure they all have their pluses and minuses, but talk about the efficiencies of the market. If we were to go back in time, back when the industry was restructured and these markets were developed, how would you do it today?
Now I know why this is a 90-minute panel. So no, here we no, look, so we operate in obviously multiple market designs. California is different, New England's different. We can operate in any of the designs, Mark. I think the consistency of a design matters. So in Texas, for example, and I'll use that just because that's home base, for us, that's our headquarters, and it's about half of our generation assets are in Texas. When that market was designed as energy only, you had almost zero renewables penetration. Now, regularly, we have a grid that's 50, 60, 70% of the energy on that grid on a daily basis is renewables. The challenge is that when you think about reliability for the customer, we cannot have the dispatchable resources that would back that up retire. So an energy-only market, which is effectively compensating you when you're producing, is not going to give compensation to resources that are on standby. Again, to build off the conference yesterday, again, room full of oil and gas folks, I asked the question, how many people here think reliability is the #1 priority? And that was rhetorical. I said, how many people here have a home standby generator? And there were about 500 people in the room. I have no idea how many hands were going to go up, but somewhere between 30 and 40% of the hands in the room went up.
In Texas?
The meeting was in Texas. The person who asked me the question has a standby home generator, and he lives in New York.
Oh.
Okay? What that says is there are people that are taking action to prioritize reliability for their household. The answer for the electric grid cannot be that everybody should go get a Generac. We have to solve that for all customers across the country. In ERCOT, this discussion around resource adequacy, I don't think has been solved yet. Texas has been a low-growth market. It's decarbonized its grid tremendously. There's been a lot of retirements of coal. There's been a lot of additions of the wind, solar, and battery. And I think this year will overtake California on storage as well. So it'll be the wind, solar, and storage leader. But if we're going to add all the industrial load, the oil and gas load, and the data center load, we've got to get back to some 24/7 dispatchable resources. And I don't think the energy-only market right now is sending that signal, and you're not seeing that in the interconnect queue. Whereas with PJM, where you have a capacity market opportunity, you are seeing some response to dispatchable resources like gas getting into the queue, but we are seeing this volatility of 3 low clears, not a reaction from a stakeholder or policymaker standpoint. 1, I'd call it mid-size or medium level sort of clear, certainly not at the cap, Lot of reaction to that, and now we're trying to figure out, are we going to see our way through that? Because the solution to high prices at some level is high prices, and you will work your way through it. But we need to have the sort of perseverance to stick to a model that rewards this capacity value. If we all overbuild, and by the way, we have a history of overbuilding as an industry, then the capacity prices will come down, the consumers will win. But right now, stuff is still retiring and not being replaced. That's going to yield high prices regardless. So we've got to get out in front of that by sending the right capacity signal.
Todd, I just want to confirm, Generac is not a sponsor, right? They are. Okay, I just checking, but might be a future opportunity. Thank you, Jim, for those insights. Sherman, let me just follow up. Again, your experiences in PJM in the markets within which you operate. Can you elaborate a bit from your point of view on Jim's comments?
Yeah, I'll reiterate a little bit, but just to kind of example, I was very taken by Commissioner Rosler's remarks, which I thought were very spot on, except for one thing, because he's never seen a no regrets infrastructure investment. It's like, I have. And that's not something I put out there often, because if I keep saying, all the regret infrastructure investment, I won't have my job as a CEO for long. But having said that, we as private companies, we make mistakes. And as Jim said, the shareholders bear those responsibilities. Now, I understand from the commissioner and the ratepayers' perspective, they haven't seen it, but I think that's very powerful. And I think that's powerful because, I know I am, and I'm sure Jim is laser focused on making the right decision. And right now, it's hard. You're looking forward. We're in a world that's changing, and from load growth, from the regulatory regime, from tariffs, and we have to try and bear down and make the right decisions. And I think that the markets are the best way to do that. So, I don't want to get into specific, which market's better. I think we can operate within all of them, but I do really want to kind of emphasize that if we're talking about speed to build stuff, there's no quicker way than incentivizing through markets. I came home last night at about 11 p.m. I saw spring came to D.C., and so my lawn was going crazy, and my wife's, her friends are coming in tomorrow, and so she was immediately, how are you going to mow the lawn? It's like, I'm kind of actually tied up tomorrow. So what was the solution? I was like, I'll go to the neighbor, I'll give him $10 and he'll mow the lawn. I could have said, like, hey, why don't we get our block and create a homeowners association, and then we can all decide whether an electric or gas mower is better, and then collectively figure out how to mow everybody's lawns, and Susie goes on Tuesday, and I go, that's going to take forever. But if I go to the neighbor and say, $20, you want to mow my lawn? Like, yeah. I think you saw it also, PJM, the RRI that sped up the interconnection queue for dispatchable resources. We have a project, we have several projects in there, but most importantly, you see a huge industry response to that. And that industry response was very creative. Looking through some of the, not all of them were public, but the ones that were publicized were like, we're unleashing capacity that is sitting there dormant that we didn't really fully know. So getting back to the pinch points, I think one on the negative side is let's stay with competitive markets. Let's create that price signal, because that is going to continue to be the fastest way to speed to market. And then two, I have to put a point in, is like speeding up the interconnection. Very practically, we're a development company. We typically will go out, get land control so we know that we can develop there, and then wait around to put an interconnection queue in, literally sit and do nothing for years until the interconnection queue comes up, and then we know whether or not we have a project. But those years, if you were talking about a critical path, it's getting through that interconnection queue. And I know there's been a lot of reform on it, and I think it's been good reform, so I'm not trying to criticize past actions, but I think there's a long way to go in terms of unleashing some of the computing power to be able to analyze that quicker and to utilize the existing infrastructure, whether it's through dynamic line ratings, surplus interconnection queues. that will unleash more ability to get more stuff on quicker.
So again, this sounds like a FERC issue, but is it? And they have been trying things. Do you see a role for Congress to get involved here, or the White House?
You're asking me, like,
Yeah, I mean, 'cause-
look, from Competitive Power Ventures perspective, and I'll be blunt, like, our federal lobbying team should stand up. Oh, we don't have one. You know, like, I'll be honest, like, I don't know. You know, you asked the question, like, from from my little aperture of the world, that's going to move, getting stuff onto the grid quicker. You know, I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to figure out where the right way is to occur, but it seems like there is a multiple, whether it's utilities looking at dynamic load ratings, whether it's the RTOs, whether it's FERC pushing it. I think it has to be a collective effort.
Yeah, agreed. Aaron, from your point of view, where do you see the potential policy changes that might facilitate bringing this new power online much quicker to meet the load?
Yeah, and I would even take a step further back from that. And, speed to market has been referenced a few different times. And it's important to note that that's really the overriding factor for our industry right now. The unprecedented demand I mentioned earlier for cloud services is only expanded when you consider the demand for artificial intelligence. And this is a highly competitive moment for our industry, but also for the United States. And I appreciated President Pridemore especially emphasizing that there are national security implications to finding ways to support this development. There are global competitiveness implications, and there are implications for the United States' economic growth. Collaboration, communication, transparency, all of these very lofty ideals are needed at this point. Sherman mentioned, we're around 15 years of relatively flat demand growth. We can't expect the same processes that carried us through 15 years of relatively flat demand to carry us through a period of load growth. And I think that can be applied to effectively everything. Forecasting is one that was brought up on the first discussion this morning, and it's one that DCC often receives outreach from utilities, from grid operators, from state utility commissions, policymakers as well. And so we're very interested in refining forecasting and identifying pathways for doing that. What type of information from our members, from our customers would be helpful to build confidence and build a more refined forecast? Are there other data sets that can be applied to refine the forecast? Are we doing scenario planning? Can we get enhanced transparency into how the forecasts are being built? I think from our members' perspective, they often put in a load request to the entity, and it's effectively a black box. We don't know the journey the load request takes. We don't know what commitments or assurances are behind the requests. And so can we get greater transparency across all stakeholders so that we can move beyond trying to identify what the correct forecast is and feel confident that load growth is here, it's significant, and we need to serve this load. So a little bit of an aside from the policy question you posed, but I think it's a very fundamental discussion that needs to occur.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, Mark, if I could just add to Aaron's comments. First, I think the opportunity for speed is leveraging the resources already on the grid. So obviously grids are built for reliability. That's the intention, which means that the vast, vast majority of the hours, there's excess capacity on the grid. There was a Duke report that came out a little while ago that was highlighting this, Duke University. But if you look at like Texas, the way we've looked at it, there's probably 10 gigawatts of data center capacity just through the dispatchable resources that are underutilized most hours of the year. We all run combined cycle fleets. I know Sherman has one, we have one. 55, 60% is a good capacity factor on a combined cycle unit. Those are resources ready to scale up right now that can handle 24/7 load, but they're built for the super peak. That's why the grid has been built the way it has been, so there's many hours to fill in. Estimates in PJM are anywhere from 15 to 40 gigawatts of data center load could be handled. So one, we just need to not fear the load. I think you heard Commissioner Pridemore say, bring it. We are competing as competitive markets with regulated markets that are welcoming this as an opportunity. And I think we're paralyzed a bit because, and I'll get to the policy matter, if you look at these interconnect queues, and again, we are in all forms of energy, like I said, off-taker for wind, but we build all the other types and operate them. But the queues are 95% renewables and battery. Everybody is busy on projects that are incentivized today through the Inflation Reduction Act. What does that mean? It means folks do chase price signals. That's evidence of a marketplace. So the incentive systems right now are driving a behavior which drives a ton of activity. These queues are not clogged with gas plants. And so the question for the country is how do we debottleneck this? Because I do think policy does drive economic signals. Those economic signals then drive behavior. The electric grid, we should take credit. The electric grid's the only sector in the U.S. economy that has decarbonized. It's down 40% in the last 20 years. It's going to continue to decarbonize as we retire coal and even replace it with gas, let alone wind, solar, and battery, and nuclear. So I do think that we are trying to solve too many variables right now, and yet we're in a load growth scenario. And I think we need to recognize that and think about the shift in policy.
Thank you. Before I turn to Mr. Chairman to get your views, I am reminded to ask the attentive audience members to please use Menti, MENTI.com and enter the code to submit your questions. Did I get that right? Okay, good. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, the question to you.
I think Jim's right. I mean, this is a great challenge in meeting this load growth needs. However, it's also a great opportunity. I mean, I say all the time that there will not be another load growth opportunity in all of our lifetimes than we have right now. And we need to seize that opportunity. What I say to folks all the time when I speak is, you know, we need to be cautious. We need to exercise caution, but not fear. We shouldn't panic. Because, you know, as Sherman pointed out, you know, there's great results on the RRI. The first RRI that was done, that was something that we advocated for at OPSI. You know, I went on OPSI in January of 23, and that was the first thing. You know, I knew a little bit about the PJMQ, but as you learn more and more about it, why are you treating every project like a greenfield project? It doesn't make sense. If we have projects that are further along, we have projects that already have interconnection established, why aren't we moving those up? Especially if we need watts. I mean, it's just common sense, right? But, you know, your question about, you know, some of the you know, policy ideas or solutions to address this issue, from a regulatory standpoint, you know, we're challenged in Pennsylvania in that we're a restructured state. So I can't go tell PPL, go build generation to meet your load projections. So we have to tinker around the edges. One of the first things we did under leadership of Vice Chair Kim Barrow at the Commission, we started our first technical conference on resource adequacy. We held that back in November. One of the issues that came out of that was the load projections and resource planning. As I said, we're a restructured state. We hadn't had to worry about resource planning for 30 years. Staff that we had at the commission that did do that are either retired or about to retire and haven't done that for 30 years. So first off, we need to rebuild that internally and try to rebuild that expertise. Jim and I were talking at dinner last night, and that, you know, we're not sure how big this iceberg is, okay? In order to go around the iceberg, you have to know how big it is. So that's one of the things we're doing, along with many other restructured states and PJM footprint, is let's look at the load forecast and see how accurate it is. Is it over-conservative? Again, because I do believe we can meet these demand needs, but it has to be planned and it has to be well thought and it has to be a smart reaction to it. So that's the first thing we're doing is trying to get those load projections and figuring out what the mountain is, the size of the mountain that we're facing. Then other things we're doing is, we have time of use rates in Pennsylvania. We do not have a lot of customers on it. Out of the 3+ million accounts we have in Pennsylvania, I think we have about 6,000 on time of use rates. But that was one of the things that, we require all of our EDCs and default service plans to have a time of use offering. Again, because we're back to affordability, and we want to make sure we have enough tools in the toolbox for consumers to be able to use that. Because as the price of this commodity increases, as it becomes scarcer and it's going to increase in value, we want to make sure that consumers have the tools available to them to meet that increased cost. We're looking at EV design policy, and again, talking about that 24-hour load curve and trying to, compress that and reduce the peaks and valleys of it and make it more linear. That's important to do, and smart EV policy, smart EV charging policy helps you do that. Virtual power plants. Aaron talked about that. I think that's a great opportunity. We have a rulemaking underway in Pennsylvania now that looks at that. One of the things, again, to meet this need, it's going to be all of the above approach. There's not going to be a silver bullet. We're certainly not going to build our way out of it. I do believe that it's going to be, our energy efficiency and conservation program. We are likely to do a new program in June of next year for another 5 phases. Again, saving, as the commodity becomes more scarce, how do we save it and how do we get the best value for it? Voltage reduction programs, that's something that we'll look for our EDCs to do. And looking at lost watts at the distribution level. Dynamic line ratings that Sherman talked about. That's another tool that helps you, keep those electrons in the system and get it to the end user. And then finally, last week, we initiated a proceeding to do an en banc hearing to develop a model tariff for data centers. I've been asked a lot about it, and I know there's a lot of suppliers in the room today, a lot of generators. This is very EDC focused, okay? We are not looking at resource adequacy or anything. We're looking at interconnection times in front of the meter. This isn't about co-located loads, nothing like that. This is facilities going in front of the meter, how quick we can get them interconnected, deposits, and what they can expect in pricing. President Pridemore talks about consistency. I call it predictability, but it's the same thing. Folks need to know when they come into Pennsylvania what to expect. And when they come in Pennsylvania next year, it should be the same thing. When they come into Pennsylvania 5 years from now, it should be the same thing. We should be consistent. So that's a good, you need that in order to have a strong place to do business. And that's what we hope to do in Commonwealth.
Thank you. Jim, you want to follow up?
I think it's the last thing I'm going to say in this panel.
Okay.
No, I'm so excited that Chairman DeFrank brought up the customer side of this, because price signals are not just about generators having a signal to build. It's about signaling when it's time for a customer to make a different choice. In Texas, we can build the end-use customer, the residential customer. So, over 10 years ago, in fact, it's about 13 years ago, we started to announce the nights and weekends plans that had free energy associated with it. It wasn't about penalizing you for peak use. It was about incentivizing you to shift and do some level of consumption, which turned out to be EV charging for a lot of customers. So we have several 100,000 customers on those plans that they voluntarily took up. We can't build those same types of plans in most parts of the country because we are not the end-use biller in retail competition to the customer. But where we can build them and have that relationship with them, we see that many customers will opt into plans that give them access to price signals in exchange for a benefit, because all customers are looking for a fair exchange. In industrial customers in Texas, without even being in a formal demand response program, we see when prices start to move up, we see about 10% of the industrial load in Texas is self-selecting to reduce consumption because they're monetizing their power, selling it back, which is lowering prices by lowering their demand. They would not do that but for price signals. If you can call them up and say, would you please, cut off your third shift, they'd say, that costs me money. But if they can save money, they're doing it. So price signals are absolutely critical for the supply side, but they are equally critical for the demand side. And customers need to be able to opt into that, not have it forced upon them, but many will opt into it, and that makes them part of the solution as well.
Yeah. So Aaron, I'd like to ask you to respond to Chairman, the Chairman's remarks about the docket proceeding. I think that he's opening up, to look at this new load from AI centers. Just based on what you've heard and based on, what the Chairman described, how do you see this as opportunities to come in and help to accomplish what the Chairman said is his obligations to ensure affordability and reliability, but also to meet your demand to, have these projects come online?
Yeah, and appreciate the question, and also appreciate the chairman initiating this proceeding. We're hopeful to have an opportunity to engage in it as well. And that's really the type of forum and engagement we're looking for. I think in certain markets, we've been on our back heels having to respond to a proposal that's put forth by the utility and trying to dig into it. And I think it's better when you can bring stakeholders together, get a variety of perspectives to shape what works best for that state and that market. So very much appreciate it. We've been engaged in, a big part of DCC's engagement is engaging in utility regulatory proceedings. So we've been thinking through a lot of the elements that we've seen in tariff filings in a number of states. I think at a high level, we're, as customers, looking for something that's evidence-based. If the utility puts something forward, is there data, is there math, is there substantiation to the provisions? I think another important piece to our members is we're here talking about data centers today because we're very much the first ship to the shores when it comes to load growth. But I believe it was Lawrence Berkeley National Labs' U.S. Data Center Energy Usage Report that was released in December that said, yes, it is significant, it's the first, but we should understand it in the broader context of load growth coming from other areas of the economy as well. So as the chairman mentioned, vehicle electrification will be one of those at varying rates in parts of the country, but also electrification of buildings, electrifications of industry. I know there's electrification of oil and gas production in Texas as well that's driving load. Pockets of the country, we're seeing hydrogen fuel production driving load as well. Certainly the onshoring and reshoring of manufacturing is happening adjacent to a lot of data center development in key data center markets. And so when you take a step back and really notice that there are other large loads other than data centers coming, it's important to us and our members that solutions are defined by actual electricity use rather than the industry that is consuming that electricity.
No, I appreciate that. Although, it's not lost on me, and I'm sure people in the audience, the need for increased data analysis, increased data. All this is digitized, all this is cloud-based, all of this uses AI to help assess. We need more data, we need more analytics, we need more high-performing computing to actually find out what is going on, which sort of means we need more data centers, we need more power, we need to get these things up and running so that we can actually do and apply AI and the cloud services that you have. So that's why we're sort of kind of chasing ourselves around here. Let me ask you this, what goes into where your members decide to site data centers?
Yeah, and apologies if I say this more than once, 36 members, you could have 36 different answers. But generally, it's some combination of access to fiber infrastructure. So we're often asked, why is there so much data center development in Virginia, which is the world's largest data center market? In part, that's a story of the undersea cables connecting to Africa, South America, Europe that come up through Virginia. If you were around in the 90s, you remember America Online, which was headquartered in Virginia and further built out some of that infrastructure. And then subsequently, data centers have expanded that infrastructure. So the fiber is laid in Virginia, and that's a big piece of interest for our members. Beyond that, speed to market is the top consideration, and the pacing challenge to that is access to reliable power in a timely manner. So you could formerly set your watch to building your data center, getting it powered in 18 to 24 months. That's not the case today. In key data center markets like Virginia, we're hearing 4 to 7, maybe 8 years before you could get your facility powered. And that's a challenge. And so our members are looking for where they can find access to power in a timely manner in ways that they can do it. Other considerations, of course, are access to water. There are different ways to cool a data center. If you didn't cool a data center, servers in the server room would create heat that raises the temperature 1 degree per minute, at which point you would quickly have server failures, and then also failure of the services and that are being supported by the data centers. So water is one way to be cooling those facilities. And then a friendly tax environment that incentivizes development. And then, of course, a reliable IT and construction workforce that can help us build these facilities well and keep them maintained and operating.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I want to come back to you. You described, basically what you go through as a commissioner to put in place opportunities for this new generation to come on, serves the people of Pennsylvania. How do you manage the constant upward pressure on prices? Because it seems to me, that's a big issue. You talked about, reliability, but that's got to be a constant tension. And tell me, how do you work with generators that come online, and then the utilities, the wire companies, and then, the comers in and saying, well, we need this generation?
So I think, any regulators that are in the audience, I see Glenn Thomas, former regulators in the audience, I think it's something that we deal with every single day, well before data centers even came into play here, and that is, reliability versus affordability and that balancing act. And that's something that every regulator deals with each and every day. In a perfect world, we replace all of our aging infrastructure and don't think twice about it. If we did that, most people couldn't afford the service, right? So how do we replace that aging infrastructure at a rate that still keeps the service affordable? That's something that's a balancing act that regulators do every day. This is nothing new. This is something that we've been doing for years and years and years. It's just a new aspect of it. It's a new pressure point of it. But how do we do it in a restructure state? Or some of the things I've talked about, some of the tools that we can use to help manage that. But affordability is certainly a concern, and it's going higher and higher up the economic ladder. I mean, what was an affordability concern today may not have been a concern 10 years ago. So it is certainly an upward trend, and it's something that we, have to deal with. In Pennsylvania, we try to, one of the first things I did was initiate a universal service proceeding where we try to match customer assistance dollars with folks that need it. One of the things, our intake process, each program had a separate application. We're trying to standardize that and use one application, because if I'm eligible for my natural gas customer assistance program, chances are I'm eligible for my electric company's customer assistance program. Why aren't we cross-enrolling folks? It's the same data. Why are we making people, prove their income twice, fill out 2 applications? Let's try to get the money that's out there to meet the folks that need it most. That's one of the things, but again, I think it's something that we deal with each and every day in terms of that affordability struggle. And then one other thing before I give up the mic back to you is, I'll do a little pitch for Pennsylvania in that we are a great state to locate data centers in. We have tons of fresh water. We are rebuilding our infrastructure there, and we have excess electric capacity, and that's something that not all states can talk about.
Yeah, thank you. Sherman, I want to turn to you. You have a wide mix of generation fleet. How do you see the trends moving toward increased renewables, compared to dispatchable power. It seems as though now, well, it's going to be, certainly with the Trump administration, all restrictions on all types of generation typically will likely be, restricted. But you operate in states that have renewable portfolio standards. You have certain dispatchable rules. How do you forecast that? How are you assessing the situation there?
Yeah, again, I feel like my job's much easier than a number of, the commissioner over here. We're customer centric, and going to the first question of like what's new, I would say over the past 5 years, what's really changed in my career, I used to be a power trader, is that the electron is now differentiated. People actually care whether it's coming from a wind plant, a solar plant, nuclear plant. I imagine we don't sell that, or just generally grid power. And so we have very different prices for the different technologies. So it really depends upon which customer is really looking for that. I think to touch a little bit upon the affordability. I do think that when I think about affordability, I think about kind of two aspects of that word. One is what is least cost, but also what's affordable to the person. Which actually is it depends. When I'm talking to, for example, a Google, what they would call affordable is very different than when I'm talking to a very small customer. And so with that, I think one of the opportunities is, as you mentioned, is creating those differentiated price signals, time of use plans that allows the customer to make the power affordable. Because one of the great innovations and the things that we are using with the data centers is the amount of data that's coming off of the overall system. So PJM every 5 minutes has a new price on, I can't remember, 15,000 different LMPs. 10 years ago, I believe, or 15 years ago, it was one price across the entire ISO. With that, we have data to do dynamic, whether it's the transmission lines or customers or automatically dispatching plants across and that makes the overall system able to utilize what's already there, whether it's transmission, whether it's a generation, much more efficiently and making that affordable. So I think when we're looking at what's the technology mix going forward, we very much see it as we're going to continue. We're investing heavily in the development of new wind, onshore wind, onshore solar, and natural gas dispatchability, and we view that as it's going to be a mix. And the pricing for each, in every different region of the country is different, and it's really going to be customer dependent upon, who picks it up.
Can I just ask you a question? Do you have in your modeling any small modular reactor designs or possibilities?
No, we don't. But
I
it's
asked
also
the question, so I deserve the answer.
Yeah, but I will couch that is I think that we are looking very much at small modular reactors, and that statement wasn't meant to say that we don't think that it will happen. It's just that we have a hard time looking much further out than the next 5 to 10 years, and we try and stay pretty honest about that. Now, having said that, do we run sensitivities of like what happens? Absolutely. Are we looking at where are they being deployed outside of the U.S., Canada being one of those, and how far along they're getting? We absolutely are looking at that to see what the opportunities are within the U.S. And what that impact would be. I think the history within the U.S. is not been great on nuclear in terms of new build nuclear. It's twice as long, twice as expensive. But can that change? Of course. So we're absolutely taking a look at it.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely,
And
Mr.
that's
Chairman.
a good point. When we talk about small modular nuclear, is that, at a $28 megawatt day, you weren't going to see small modular nuclear. Never, ever. This market is more reactive, and it's the price signal it's sending is going to bring other technologies on board, assuming that price signal continues.
Yeah. We have our first question. Thank you. Jim, it's to you.
Was it my team that said it?
Well, there is a comment in here about sending $5 someplace. But okay, Texas is an energy-only market, but has the Texas Energy Fund been critical to getting gas generation built, or what do you need to be able to serve all the new demand?
So the Texas Energy Fund, some folks are probably more familiar with it than others, but it was an attempt in the last legislative session in 2023 to incentivize gas-fired generation through low-interest loans and completion bonuses without necessarily affecting the dispatch of the price of power like a production tax credit does for other forms of generation. You've seen a lot of interest in that original sort of initial interest that took place last spring. I think it was over 55 gigawatts of gas was initially in the indication of interest. And then they've been trying to pare that down to something around 10 gigawatts. There have been reports of different companies pulling out of the Texas Energy Fund for a variety of reasons, and other than what they say publicly, we don't have a view as to the most important reason why folks aren't sticking with it. But there has been fallout. We had one project that was considered in the due diligence process. Now we have a second one. So as folks have dropped out, we were actually added for a second project that we already had in flight. But we've also said that low interest loans alone don't provide revenue. It's just a cheaper form of financing. So the question still out there is, what's the revenue model for Texas going to look like? And you can imagine when you have a lot of zero or negative priced hours, it's really hard to be building a combined cycle or a peaker if you're going to be facing that kind of what I said earlier. The market design didn't contemplate this much of a renewables penetration. So other products that the PUC and ERCOT are looking at are important. There's an ancillary product that they're considering, this dispatchable reliability reserve service. The details are not yet known. The performance credit mechanism was one that was going to potentially reward generators that were available during critical hours. That has been deferred. So I don't think Texas has fully resolved the revenue model that they're going to use to incentivize dispatchable generation. The other way it could happen is if large customers, some of Aaron's clients, would want to sign a contract for the asset, then you have effectively created a revenue mechanism, whether that's a gas plant that ends up being grid connected or even a nuclear expansion, small modular reactor or even large scale nuclear. But I think to just go into the wholesale market and effectively earn spot revenue off of high CapEx assets that provide that 24/7 dispatchable service, that reward and recognition of what that asset is bringing, whether it's gas or nuclear, is not in the Texas design, and I don't think expanding TEF alone is going to solve that.
Yeah. Very interesting response, and you mentioned Aaron about a product that you might offer him, and this coincides with our second question from alert listeners in the audience. So as Jim had just mentioned, systems essentially built, for peak. How much flexibility do data centers have on the, need for 24/7? Really, what are some creative thinking here about getting you the power you need and recognizing the realities of the way the grid is operating?
Yeah, it's another important question and one we hear in some flavor wherever we go. But you alluded to the nature of many of our facilities, and that's 24/7, 365. Again, the vast majority of data center development to date online is supporting cloud services, supporting the internet. I recently was touring a data center a couple of weeks ago for a large bank, and they explained during the course of that tour, well, what happens if you take this facility offline? It's, well, the banking website goes down. So you lose access to your bank account. That's not the case for every facility or every company. And again, we have 36 members innovation is in the DNA of all of these companies, and so you're seeing an exploration of a variety of different approaches, including could you shift computing load from one facility to the other during times of strain on the grid. The research on that is pretty nascent at this point, but it has been proven it can work for some of our members. And with that, I would carefully note that we often refer to the data center industry fairly monolithically, and there are some important differences and nuances, including business models. And so many of our larger members are what we would call self-performers, and so they're building a facility for their own operations and have control of that server infrastructure within the facility. The vast majority of our members are what we would call multi-tenant build-to-suit companies, and they're constructing data center facilities for one or more tenant. So they may build an entire facility for one large Fortune 500 company, or they may be leasing to upwards of 150, 200 different tenants. The important distinction in that is that they aren't controlling the server infrastructure within that facility. They're simply leasing the space. And so if you're going to try and shift computing load, let's say, from one facility to the other, it's not necessarily possible in that instance because you're not controlling the server infrastructure. Your tenants within the facility are. So that's just one of several different nuances. Flexibility in terms of, Dominion Energy, for example, in Virginia has a demand response program targeting data centers. There's very little participation because of that 24/7 nature of the program. The other piece you run into is how would a data center tap into flexibility? The lowest hanging fruit would be to lean on their backup generation, which diesel generation is the current standard for the industry. And if you begin running diesel generators, you quickly run into state and federal permitting rules around air quality. So it's a complex question. It's one that our members are all digging into, and I would finally just conclude that EPRI is running a well-publicized DC Flex initiative, data center flex initiative that includes generators, includes grid operators, utilities, and data center companies, in exploring that exact question of how can we identify greater flexibility from this load. And so our members are engaged in that process, and we're looking forward to the results and findings from it.
Yeah.
Mark,
Jim,
just
did you
to
wanna
build on
respond?
that response, the customers, some of the large self-performed customers we've talked to, a year ago, the discussion of proactively shifting to a form of backup, that conversation did not last very long. We're seeing that as a much more meaningful conversation today, and the discussion of shifting the form of backup to less diesel and more natural gas, so that if it were to run, it would have a longer run window and would not have some of the same environmental constraints, but that does cost more money to do the gas-fired versus the diesel today. However, the critical element there is if in 99% of the hours there's excess capacity on the grid, we are really still solving this super peak issue, which the backup generation, which is the only customer class, to give credit to Aaron's members, it's the only customer class that brings one-for-one backup when they bring the load. So as a society, there's an opportunity to benefit from the fact that their customers, their clients, are going to bring that backup generation. And for just a few hours of the year, we need to figure out how to tap that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Sherm, did you want to elaborate a bit on
I'll
that?
also add on. I know this is probably going to be redundant, but I really strongly believe that if you democratize the data, you're going to get vastly better solutions. And so if you do provide those price signals, individualized, we could get the 20 smartest people is going to come up with a worse solution than just sending those price signals out to every individual data, server, and pricing the backup generation appropriately. And you're going to end up with a much better, cleaner system.
And that's something we're going to be talking about in our proceeding as well, particularly load shifting, load management, and how to deal with all this load coming online. I mean, when we talk about the Amazon facility, for instance, Susquehanna power plant, I mean, at full build out at the current filing, it's going to be 480 megawatts. So just so everyone understands, and this is also what is the opportunity with data centers, is that that's the load of the city of Pittsburgh. One facility is the load of the city of Pittsburgh. you don't need anywhere near the infrastructure there. You don't need the miles of lines. You don't need all the poles. You don't need the substations. You don't need all of that. So when you consider the limited cost and the amount of the load, that's why I say this is an opportunity that we will never see in our lifetime.
The limited cost to socializing the cost to the customers?
No, I mean the limited cost of serving that amount of load. If say we did another city of Pittsburgh, you would have miles and miles of lines. You would have how many substations throughout the facility there. Here, you have that same load over acres instead of miles.
Another question from the audience, and I think this is a question we all have been waiting to get to, but how strong is the trend towards co-location, and how are regulations helping or hindering this? Aaron, would you like to take that first?
Sure, I'll take the first stab at it. So I've mentioned our members are seeing unprecedented demand for data and digital services. I've emphasized how speed to market, how quickly you get your facility up and powered to meet that demand is really the driving factor for us. When you take those two facts, that really is what brings us to the discussion around co-locating of load at generating facilities. I would not say it is the preference of our industry or what we believe is the best approach, but I do believe, and our membership does as well, that if you can structure it correctly, if you can assess the grid impacts of a specific arrangement, if you can put ratepayer protections in place, if that load was drawing network load or network services and benefiting from that they're paying their full cost of service in that instance, that we should think it should be permissible. Again, it's not the preference of the industry, but when you're looking around trying to find access to power quickly, and you see some of these generating facilities, and if you could put those guardrails around it, we think it should be permissible. And I think it's similar around the discussions of some more innovative microgrid or on-site generation solutions. I think our members would love to be leading to investments in improving and strengthening the grid rather than kind of going alone. But we need access to power, and we need it fairly quickly.
Yeah, it seems co-location means as much collaboration.
I would just add, and
Chairman.
it seems as though co-location's a symptom of an underbuilt transmission system, right? I mean, think about it. These folks are putting $10 billion facilities, and you can only locate it in a certain spot because we don't have the infrastructure to be able to serve that facility if it was in a different spot, another spot. That's the problem. And I mean, it's easier for Aaron's members to bring every other utility service to that facility, water, telecommunications, than it is to get the electric build out to a different location. That's telling. And that's what we hope to accomplish with our, proceeding, is to give you predictability, to give you another option to be in front of the meter if you choose to.
And that's like a cost benefit? Is this, you're willing to have some of the ratepayers pick up the improvements to the
I think what
transmission system?
what we're going to be doing is looking at, what I would like to do is looking at an accelerated interconnection timeline where if Aaron's members want to do some of the build out on their own, they want to build their own substations and things like that, then they get connected quicker. That insulates the ratepayer from those costs.
Mm-hmm. Jim?
Mark, I would just add, and I agree with Chairman DeFrank, I think the evidence will be that multiple models will end up existing. I think Commissioner Rosner shared that this morning, and Aaron has already emphasized he doesn't have a one-size-fits-all, client base either. So I think we need to think about how do we make each of those models work, because co-location can mean truly co-located and cannot pull from the grid. It could be co-located and it pulls from the grid. It could be an islanded solution to get started that later connects to the grid. But the logic that a 24/7 load sits next to a 24/7 resource with minimal cost to connect the two is efficient from a resource standpoint, from a societal standpoint. So when I think where this discussion has gone in the past is folks have talked about it, and actually the Amazon talent announcement
merchant battery at this point. We don't see the penetration that, that high at this point in time. Now, will it get there in 10, 15 years? Like everybody can kind of, sit around a, table and drink beers and, and argue till the cows come home, but we don't really see that quite yet. So batteries are absolutely part of the mix. They're going to be part of the mix, and I think that it's a combination. When you say long duration, I hear 4, 6, 8 hours. I've heard so many different definitions of what long duration is. I think the UK might have a different view now after an entire season of low wind, but I think yes, generally speaking, batteries are going to be part of the mix. I think it's really a function of the intermittent resource penetration.
Mm-hmm. Jim?
Mark, I would just add, I think even the solutions in California with batteries, and I agree with Sherman that renewable penetration plays a big part of this. In Texas, it's playing a big part because it's helping us with sort of the hours of 7 to 9 when you see the solar come off. Getting back to one of the original topics we talked about, what is the planning criteria for reliability? If you need a 2-day, 5-day kind of winter event like we had in Texas, 4-hour, 8-hour, 12-hour battery is not going to bridge that. So as I think some of the data centers are thinking about some of these other backup solutions other than just diesel, I think it really comes down to getting comfortable as a customer with your planning criteria. When I mentioned the sort of standby home generators, those are folks that also could have put a 2 or 4-hour battery in their home, but they weren't planning for a 2 or 4-hour event. They're planning for a multi-day event potentially. So I do think you got to fit the technology to the purpose. And I think batteries are helping on an everyday cycle, that normal, what I'd call normal load, normal solar, normal wind. The batteries are filling in the gaps, and it works as a low-cost solution for storage. If we have to plan for the extreme events and how do we meet customer needs, I think we're going to have really long duration storage beyond what's on the horizon right now. And we've got good technologies that can meet that need already.
We have a question here, and it kind of builds on, I think, Chairman's comments about Pennsylvania's a good spot to, come in and build. And it's, what are individual states doing, rightly or wrongly, to attract new generation? Are there lessons that can be learned from one state to another?
So I think we are seeing, at least in the PJM footprint, some states taking efforts legislatively to try to incent new generation. I'm not sure how successful it's going to be. I think that we have bills introduced in Pennsylvania. The governor's coming forward with his lightning plan, which would, one of the key pieces of that is the reset board, which allows for permitting and siting of generation. It eases that. We had an issue in northeastern Pennsylvania where a local municipality stopped the generator from coming in. In Pennsylvania, we preempt local zoning for agriculture operations. We preempt local zoning for gaming operations. We do not preempt local zoning for generation.
Got your priorities.
So that's some of the things that we can do to help incent and bring new generation online. Because like I said, we've had an issue where we had a local community stop generator coming in.
Just can you elaborate just a bit? What was the source? Was there a hue and cry against it, or it was unnecessary?
No, I believe it was a gas. I believe it was a gas plant. It was in an area of the state that that has natural gas production. Before I was on the commission, I lobbied, and I had a few pipeline clients, and I will say that folks just don't want things in their backyard. I mean, that. I've seen opposition on pipelines from people who work in the industry, but don't want it in their backyard. They want it in the neighbor's backyard. So I think that's just human nature, and it's just something we have to work through.
Now, at DOE, we thought we'd give out lapel pins or something to acknowledge those that would accept energy infrastructure within their view shed and call them, that's a sign of American patriotism, or something. Yes. So from your point of view, when you look at states, et cetera, would you?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of hit that, and I'll hit where we are looking as opposed to where we're not looking, to try and keep this on the positive. But You know, with regards to, you know, development, you know, first of all, you know, being within a host community that actually wants you. Not everybody's going to want you within that host community is absolutely essential. And when we develop, we're thinking of it from the long term, because we're not going to develop and then flip. We're going to own this, and so we want to be a good citizen, you know, within that community. But being a receptive community is absolutely important. I think that's less to do, you know, if we have to rely on the lawyers to get acceptance, we've already lost. I'll put it that way. So then beyond that, then is like, okay, you know, if you're accepted within the local community, then it's, you know, is the state supportive of development? Are we going to be able to get through, you know, the hundreds of permits in a timely manner? Are we going to be able to, you know, apply for something and get an answer back, right or wrong, yes or no, within a reasonable point of time? And 10 years is not a reasonable point of time. You know, it has to be a reasonable point of time. And I'm not trying to say it has to be a rubber stamp of yes, and I'm not trying to say it has to be overnight. You know, but it has to be a definitive decision. And there's some states that are better than others in that. And I would say that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we've built 3 plants, very different technologies. And honestly, our host communities wanted one or the other. You know, they're very different. It wasn't always, you know, solar can be just as controversial as natural gas, and wind just as controversial as all of them. So, but Pennsylvania has been and continues to be a very, very good state to continue to look at. Ohio is also a very good state for development. One of the projects that we, you know, put into the RRI is in Ohio. It's a large natural gas facility. We get through the permitting there, and again, not rubber stamped, but we get an answer, and that's the most important.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, this next question is sort of to you. And Jim, we know people go to Texas for a whole bunch of different reasons, so we'll give you that. But I know you do operate
Texas is
in
also,
different...
we're also developing in Texas. Sorry, I don't want to leave a state out just because I didn't mention it.
No. Yeah, let me get Aaron's point of view on this, Aaron. I know 36 members and they operate everywhere, but just in your experience, and you came from Excel, which covered a lot of different states. But what can states do? You know, what's been your experience if you had a wish list to go to which states and say, it'd be great if you could do this, we could be there?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the site selection considerations I raised before, but a tax environment, at least incentivizing the inputs or providing a break on the inputs that go into a data center is an important kind of a table stakes.
So that is that equipment that goes in there?
Yes, yeah, so the server racks and equipment that go into these facilities.
And it's tax abatement, tax credits, or is it an
It depends
investment tax
depends on
credit?
the state, but really these facilities still generate substantial tax revenue at the local county level, especially for these communities, and that funds significant amounts of their annual operating budgets in some of the key markets. Power. The states with power infrastructure generation and transmission will attract this industry, and that's where you're seeing a lot of the development go today.
So existing infrastructure, that's there. So that raises the question, you know, brownfield sites, right, of maybe a shuttered coal facility, but you have the transmission all built up, the infrastructure. Is that an attractive location?
Yeah, and actually in my home state of Minnesota, that's part of the story there, where you have a transitioning coal unit. There's solar going in, there's long duration storage going in, and then there's also some proposed data center projects adjacent for that interconnection as well. So this is an industry that needs power, and so to the extent you all are looking to engage with our industry, DCC is here to be a resource and connect you with our members and provide education and information on the industry. So happy to engage. I know the folks on this stage have done great on behalf of their companies, and really appreciate the commission in Pennsylvania leaning in as well.
Aaron, you have a chance to continue with this question. The data center customers needing 24/7 continue to sign renewable purchase power agreements at high rates. Will we start to see them sign PPAs for the dispatchable thermal plants that match their load?
I was waiting for this question.
Well, we got it in still with 5 minutes and 26 seconds left.
Yeah, and again, it'll,
And who?
yeah, it's going to depend on the company, the market, but again, speed to market, your ability to get a facility powered in an environment where we're hearing 4 to 7 to 8 years at a critical moment, that's a very long time for this industry. But I will caveat that this industry also is not foregoing its sustainability commitments. I think it sees the challenges of this moment, challenges on the grid, but you're also seeing the announcements around small modular reactors, either partnerships or investments in these companies. You're seeing announcements around long duration storage. You're seeing announcements in enhanced geothermal. You're seeing announcements in carbon capture and sequestration technologies. And so, again, innovation is in the DNA of this industry. We've got challenges for probably the next 8-10 years at least, but it's an industry that's also looking to the next generation solutions to ensure we're ready.
Mr. Chairman.
And just to add to that, we are seeing some of that. I mean, with the Constellation deal to start up 3 Mile Island again, that is in fact a PPA. I mean, it's Microsoft taking all that power there. So, you know, that restart is in fact a PPA. So we are seeing some of that.
That's good. Jim?
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, when you ask the question about the markets in the states, leadership at the top of the House in, say, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, that says, I want to welcome the load, gives a signal to generators, because generators will not run into a market that's not growing very quickly unless they have a contract. And then ultimately that brings jobs. And it's a really economic development sort of orientation. And I think what Aaron's members are trying to find is, where are they welcomed? And there are some states doing a better job of welcoming and seeing it as a solution, in which case the generators, whether it's a direct contract or putting the power to the grid, if they see load growth, that's a price signal. We can build into that. So that's a flywheel. And I think Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Texas are doing a really good job of that so far.
Yeah, and if I could just briefly add, you know, we often get questions around what are the economic benefits of the industry. And so last month, we released a report produced by PwC that really digs into the economic and social impacts of the data center industry. That's at datacentercoalition.org if you're interested in seeing. But some of the top line of that is that the data center industry as of last year has 600,000 jobs, which was a 50% increase over a 6-year period. So the industry is growing quickly. And moreover, you have to look at data centers a little bit differently in the sense that they're supporting all aspects of our economy. And so for every job within the data center industry, the report found that 6 additional jobs in the economy are supported or made possible by data center infrastructure.
All right, well, we're down to the 2-minute warning. So I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to answer this question. We're in the 90-day period where President Trump is still issuing, executive orders. So if you were to ask for the president to issue an executive order that would make your lives better in your businesses, what would it be? So with that, let me start with Jim.
I don't think this was on the list ahead of time. And this is an executive order that is not tied up in courts for years and years.
The floor is yours.
Look, I think, so the DNA of our company is all about competing. And I think that the structure of the markets has gotten more and more complicated through time as it's become a much more complex stakeholder-driven process. If we were in a sort of no subsidy world, let price signals be price signals, we're good with that.
Yeah, good point. Aaron.
Yeah, and we've certainly appreciated the administration's recognition of the vital importance of our industry. I think that was in question for some years, but this administration has recognized it. We appreciate that. But I think meeting this moment is really going to come down to greater communication, collaboration, and transparency. And I think that's going to happen across the folks in this room. It's going to happen with regulators, with policymakers, utilities, generators, and customers. And so really appreciated the opportunity to be here today. And again, DCC is here to be a resource.
All right, thank you. Sherman.
I also want to thank Todd and the entire EPSA team for pulling this together. It's a great way to communicate out. I think it's a tough question on one executive order. I tend to 100% agree with Jim. If you let the markets work and you send the right price signals, it will react, and we will react to that. And with that, it's I think if anything, if we think about it, not so much of like let's select which is the direction we want to go, but let's try and release the handcuffs for all the technologies to get on the grid as quickly and positively as possible. Then I think we're really truly unleashing the ability to meet the demand of the day. Not view this as a challenge, but really as a real opportunity for not just our companies, but the entire nation in terms of really stepping up and
Good
meeting the AI
insights.
challenge.
Good insights. Mr. Chairman, as a state person, what help do you need from the federal government,
Yeah, and I will
if any?
I would also like to thank Todd and the team at EPSA, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. And also thank you for recognizing me as a regulator. I get to go last, so I was able to gather my
Get the
thoughts.
last word.
You put Jim on the hot seat there. But this is something I think the FERC's already doing, and so I would encourage it, and that is establishing the rules of the road. So for centers that are going in front of the meter, we're going to handle that in Pennsylvania. But for co-located loads or those behind the meter, that rules are established either nationally or at minimal at the RTO level. What we are concerned about is that we're in a competition and a race to the bottom with other states, that we're in the same RTO sharing the same electrons. And for a state that's exporting, we're going to be sending our electrons to watch development happen in another state. I think that we need rules at least at the RTO level, if not at the national level.
Well, that will be the last word. Please join me in thanking this great panel. Thank you.